working towards being a more open, diverse and caring community. We welcome everyone joining us today, valuing and affirming every person exactly as they are, regardless of race, gender identity or sexual orientation, age, ability, nationality or faith. No matter where you are on your journey, no matter what your story is, you are welcome here. The story of God is bigger, wider, more inclusive and welcoming, and filled with more love than we could ever imagine. There is room here for everyone. There is room here for you. And today will be a bit different as we are concentrating on the Passion narrative from the 4 Gospels. Not really to study, but just to reflect and worship and meditate. So the service is divided into the 4, led by 4 different people. So there will be more Bible reading than ever before you've had in one service, and perhaps times of silence to just sit and meditate.
For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you, just as my Father has conferred on me, a kingdom, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, listen. Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail, and you, when once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. And he said to them, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the cock will not crow this day until you have denied 3 times that you know me.
Mark contains the first recorded evidence we actually have of the trial and crucifixion of Jesus. Mark 14:32-72. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy and they did not know what to say to him. And he came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping, taking a rest? Enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Look, my betrayer is at hand." And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a rebel? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." All of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands.' But even on this point their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, 'Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?' But he was silent and did not answer. Again the high priest asked him, 'Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?' And Jesus said, 'I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming when the clouds of heaven.' Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, 'Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?' And all of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to strike him, saying to him, 'Prophesy.' And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the female servants of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, 'You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth.' But he denied it, saying, 'I do not know or understand what you're talking about.' And he went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed. And the female servant, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, 'This man is one of them.' But again he denied it. Then after a little while the bystanders again said to Peter, 'Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean, and you talk like one.' But he began to curse, and he swore an oath, 'I do not know this man you are talking about.' And at that moment the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, 'Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times.' And he broke down and wept. So Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. Now at the festival, Pilate used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man named Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, 'Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?' For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. 'Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the King of the Jews?' They shouted back, "Crucify him." Pilate asked, "What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole cohort, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him, and they began saluting him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck his head with a reed, spat on him, and kept down a homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. They compelled a passer-by who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. When they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. And they crucified him and divided his clothes amongst them, casting lots to decide what each should take. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge read against him, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 rebels, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha! You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, who were also mocking him amongst themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe." And those who crucified with him also taunted him. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." And someone rang and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come to take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. Now when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's son." There were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Jose and Salome, who followed him when he was in Galilee and ministered to him. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. When evening had come, and since it was a day of preparation, that is, the day before Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate wondered if he were already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had been dead for some time. When he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the body to Joseph. Then Joseph brought his linen cloth, and taking down the body, wrapped it in the linen cloth, and laid it in a tomb that had been hewn out of rock. He then rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Jose saw where the body was laid.
Others he does not know. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and stone the messengers God has sent you. How many times I wanted to put my arms around all your people, just as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not let me. And so your temple will be abandoned and empty. From now on, I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, 'God bless him who comes in the name of the Lord.'" continuing on. At every Passover festival, the Roman governor was in the habit of setting free any one prisoner the crowd asked for. At that time, there was a well-known prisoner named Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to set free for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus called the Messiah?" He knew very well that the Jewish authorities had handed Jesus over to him because they were jealous. While Pilate was sitting in the judgment hall, his wife sent him a message. "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, because in a dream last night I suffered much on account of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask Pilate to set Barabbas free and to have Jesus put to death. But Pilate asked the crowd, "Which one of these two do you want me to set free for you?" "Barabbas," they answered. "What then shall I do with Jesus called the Messiah?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they all answered.
So now we've moved on to Matthew. That scene that Matthew paints for us there, with Pilate offering Barabbas and the crowd choosing him over Jesus, it's a very dramatic scene. Numerous composers and filmmakers have spent their talents on it. And today I want to comment on two key choices that the crowd makes. Now, just to avoid confusion, note that Matthew gives Barabbas a first name, Jesus. More on that later, but if I say Jesus, I mean Jesus Christ, not Jesus Barabbas. Now, what about Pilate? In all four Gospels, Pilate's seen as somewhat reluctant to condemn Jesus, even trying to release Jesus by this Barabbas offer. However, that isn't really the Pilate of history. I think the film got it much more accurate. The Pilate that is revealed through other historical texts is a tough, ruthless man who wouldn't think twice about crucifying another Jew. The Gospel writers all wish to reduce Pilate's responsibility and put it onto the Jewish leaders and the Jewish people. They had their reasons, which we won't go into now. And the Jews did play a role in this drama. But make no mistake, Pilate was firmly in control here. To use a modern word, in this episode, Pilate's toying with Barabbas. He could even be seen as trolling the crowd. He knows the chief priests want Jesus gone. He knows they're jealous of Jesus. So Pilate plays this game. Who should I set free? You want this one? Or do you want that one? He plays with them. It's just a game to Pilate. He would have made a very good modern politician. So both Jesus the Messiah and Jesus Barabbas are condemned for being revolutionaries. Barabbas had committed murder as part of his attempt to overthrow Roman rule. That's what we learnt from Mark's reading. Jesus the Christ was also a revolutionary. He spoke of a new world, a world free from oppression, just like Barabbas may have. The average person in Judea and Galilee was poor and suffered from the Roman occupation as well as from the oppressive leadership of the Jewish elites, the collaborating chief priests and elders, heavy taxes, confiscation of property, rising inequality. We have plenty of modern examples of societies that suffer under autocratic leaders and a class of wealthy elites that feed off them. So that is to say, Jesus and Barabbas had some things in common. Both were seeking a better life for the Judean masses. So what is a bit counterintuitive here is that the crowd is swayed by those very elites, the chief priests and the elders. sway the crowd against Jesus the Messiah. Only a week earlier, Jesus had been wildly popular. He'd been welcomed into town as a liberator. Now we see the crowd siding with their oppressors, manipulated by the elites to support the status quo, to act against their own best interests. I've always wondered, how did the sentiment of the crowd change so quickly? From welcoming Jesus to just a week later doing the bidding of the elites. But isn't that exactly what just happened in the US? Didn't the poorest people in the US just vote for an autocrat who would empower a class of wealthy elites who would go on to make the lives of the masses so much worse? In that modern example, we can point to the use of social media and other instruments like that as a means of the manipulation. But the process is the same. The poor are manipulated into supporting those who would simply continue to exploit them. It's such a tragic scene that we see repeated time and time again through history, right down to our times. Jesus doesn't get to speak to the crowds, but his triumphal entry just a week before, his actions in the temple, his other activities that week in Jerusalem, were clearly not enough to protect him against this manipulation by the chief priests and other Jewish elites. We see it then and we see it now. And I don't know what to say except let's heed the warning and be aware of that sort of manipulation. The second aspect of this drama I want to highlight is a choice between Jesus and Barabbas. The name Barabbas means son of the Father. In the Mark reading we had the word Abba, meaning father. Bar means son of the Father. Matthew adds the first name Jesus. So we have Jesus, son of the Father. The other Gospels don't add that first name. I think Matthew is just heightening the choice here by making the contrast between these two Jesuses so explicit. And Barabbas may have been a real person, or Matthew's treatment makes it look like it may have even been just a literary construction to highlight the choice the crowd had. Matthew wants to emphasise that this crowd did have a choice between Jesus the Messiah or Jesus, son of the Father. Which Jesus do you want? I've already said they were sort of fighting for the same thing, whether their methods were very different. Barabbas took the traditional approach via violence. People had already been killed as a result. Jesus, the Messiah, took the approach of non-violent resistance, the approach of loving one's enemies, of truth-telling, of envisaging a better future built on community, not coercion. In Matthew's story, Pilate is not asking the crowd to condemn revolution, though of course Pilate would be against it. He's asked them to choose between these methods. Now it's fascinating that Josephus, who was first a participant and then an historian of the Jewish War of 66 to 70, vehemently opposes the non-violent resistance of people like Jesus. He admires those who fight and kill and are killed, but thinks those who try and win via love and non-violence are moral reprobates. Of course, that war which Josephus was part of came about precisely because of the choice we see the people making here in this scene. In choosing Barabbas, violence, the people chose destruction, which is exactly what happened in that war, which probably had happened just before Matthew wrote this gospel. The gospel writers say that Jesus foresaw what was going to happen. When Jesus came into Jerusalem earlier that week, he wept over it. I think it's in Luke's gospel where he says, if only you knew the way to peace, but you didn't. You made the wrong choice. They chose Barabbas. They chose violence. And hence it meant suffering, death and destruction. I think the gospel writers set up this drama in this way to highlight both that manipulation by the elites and this choice of liberation via violence rather than love. The gospel writers are asking the question of the readers while the consequences are still fresh in their minds. They can still see that temple destroyed. But the same question applies today. Who will you choose? Jesus the Messiah or Jesus Barabbas? We all want to change the world, but only one way gets the results we want. Peace through war didn't work for the Jews the first century. It worked for the Romans for a few hundred years, but then it didn't. Can peace through non-violence and enemy love work? Jesus thought it would. This Easter, as we meditate on Jesus' violent death at the hands of that autocratic and violent empire, the same question is asked of us. Which son of which father, Jesus or Barabbas?